My sisters and brothers, the Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Jesus went across the Sea of Galilee. A large crowd followed him because they saw the signs he was performing on the sick. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. The Jewish feast of Passover was near. When Jesus raised his eyes and saw that a large crowd was coming to him, he said to Philip, "Where can we buy enough food for them to eat?" He said this to test him, because he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 200 days' wages worth of food would not be enough for each of them to have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, the brother of Simon Peter, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what good are these for so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people recline." Now there was a great deal of grass in that place. So the men reclined, about 5,000 in number. Then Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed them to those who were reclining, and also as much of the fish as they wanted. When they had had their fill, he said to his disciples, "Gather the fragments left over so that nothing will be wasted." So they collected them and filled 12 wicker baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves that had been more than they could eat. When the people saw the sign he had done, they said, "This is truly the prophet, the one who is to come into the world." Since Jesus knew that they were going to come and carry him off to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain alone. The Gospel of the Lord.
Greetings of peace and goodness to you, my friends. Have you noticed that, the readings today, even in the psalm about nourishment, Elisha also multiplying bread and the hand of the Lord feeding his people, as we sang in the psalm. It's about nourishment, and the nourishment that we continually receive from God our Father. And what are we expected, what's our response? What are we expected to do when we become aware of how we are nourished by the Lord? A priest in a Brooklyn parish was preaching on today's gospel. And he referred to the miracle of the loaves and the fishes as a miracle of generosity. And it's easy to see why. First of all, there's the marvelous generosity of the boy, who with his gift of 5 barley loaves. Notice how John is very specific about the kind of bread. Barley loaves has a significance. A barley loaf of bread was the bread of the poor, because the grain of barley was more hearty than the grain of the wheat and didn't require as much tending to. It was easier to grow barley. So as with the 5 barley loaves and a couple of fish, and they weren't raw fish, they're probably cured, that made the miracle possible. Now, it was a small thing. in and of itself. But not for the little boy. It was all that he had. It was all that he had, probably to feed his own family. And there are many who are willing to make contributions out of their relative plenty, out of their surplus wealth. But how many are there willing to give when it means going without themselves? We call the widow's mite, and she gave all that she had in her contribution to the temple. There is the generosity of Jesus, which is the great lesson for us all. Not only did Jesus feed all the people, and there were more than 5,000, because unfortunately and regrettably, all they counted was the men. There were women and children there as well. But Jesus fed them all with that meager donation of that poor boy. And he saw to it that each got as much as they wanted or they needed. And what happened? They had their fill, and there were 12 baskets full of leftovers. Presumably, those 12 baskets went to that little boy. It was his bread and his fish. Well, that Brooklyn priest left the altar at the end of Mass, and happy in his belief that he had preached a nice little sermon about generosity. And as he was unvesting in the sacristy, an elderly woman came in and inquired if anyone handed in a shopping bag that she had left in the pew when she came forward for reception of the Eucharist, because when she returned to the pew, it was gone. She had brought it into the church, and she couldn't find it anymore. They asked the ushers. The usher said, no one had turned in a shopping bag. The priest was expecting her to say, and I'm sure some may have already said, how terrible that is. Who would steal from another person in the house of God? Or something like that. But not that woman. She made no such remark. Without a trace of anger or bitterness, she simply said, well, maybe the person who took it needs it more than I do. What was in the bag, the priest said? 2 loaves of bread was the answer. Her answer delighted the priest, but it also humbled him, because he knew that her dire position, he would not have been so generous in his response to the theft of his property. He was also humbled by another reason. He was preaching generosity. This woman was practicing it. Hers was a generosity of heart, not just words. The Lord nourishes all of us at the Eucharistic banquet, as surely as generosity himself, he fed the people in the wasteland. He continues to nourish us so that in our turn, we're also to be generous to others, maybe some others that are not even in this room or present now. Generosity should have a central place in every Christian's heart, every day. And we do get opportunities every day when we deal with one another to practice it, not just in words, but to act it out. I'm reminded ever so concretely, and I'm sure some of you are aware, but maybe not everyone here. From our parish, 12 and we should be so proud of them. 12 people left yesterday morning at 4 o'clock in the morning from the airport. I didn't even know there was a 4 o'clock in the morning. They left at 4 o'clock in the morning to represent us on mission to Jamaica. Each individual had 2 hefty suitcases. I could have fit in one easily, but they were filled with something more precious. They were filled with sundry articles and soaps and toiletries and toothbrushes and all kinds of things, filled to the brim. Each one had 2, so that was 24 in all. And each of the volunteers, they carried a small bag, carry-on bag, with their own personal items. They left those 2 suitcases in Jamaica, which we would expect. They also leave, they're there now as we speak, they also leave their carry-on so that when they return at the end of this week, they return only with the clothes on their back. They leave the clothes that they wore there, they return also, just with the clothes on their back. They represent us. They represent our parish, and we are so proud. We should be, and so humbled. They know, as we should, that generosity is not only about giving things, but also more especially about giving ourselves, of our time, our energy, our love. And there is a reward for every act of generosity. The reward is enormous. The reward is the joy, is one of the first fruits of generosity. You rarely meet a generous person who's sad, and you almost never meet a happy miser. But it's not necessary, my friends, to go to a foreign land to know the joy of being generous. There are so many ways that we can know that joy right here, right now. From those wonderful volunteers who give of their time and their talents right here in our parish. For example, our cafe and our gift shop. They're always, and they still are, looking for volunteers. The volunteers that we have there now should be applauded for what they do, to allow these ministries to continue, for surely they could not without them. And every single one of them, if you ever met them, and I hope you do meet them, is joyful and basking in the Lord's reward for them, for their giving. These 2 ministries alone are in need of more volunteers to assist and experience the joy and the reward of giving. Adorers to the Eucharist in our Adoration Chapel are needed, as well as for the car show that's coming up on Labor Day. Volunteers are needed. The proceeds from that car show benefit the parish and the school. So when we volunteer to help, we're helping us to be a better, more joyful, more Christian family. Those who give will receive, and they will receive in abundance. When we're asked to do something or to give some time, we may think that we're unable to give. But think of that small boy, and think of the reward of the multiplication that he received from his donation. Those 5 barley loaves and 2 fish turned into 12 baskets full of food for him because he gave all that he had. It's said, I think it's in Luke's gospel, give and you will receive. Good measure will they pour into your lap, overflowing. let's not just think about it now. Let's act on it. May the Lord grant you peace in ways that the world cannot.